Okay, well, welcome everybody. And I'll chat a little bit if people are a little late coming to this. This is our August edition of Brown Bagging It in My Backyard, and this is part of the Nature in My Backyard initiative, which is an initiative of the Audubon Society of Greater Cleveland and the Shaker Lakes Garden Club. And this is an effort to try and encourage all of us to save the world one backyard at a time, and not any backyard, but our own backyards. So today's program is going to be really, really excellent. You'll want to tune in next week, or next month rather. There's a lot of reasons we need to remember September 11th, but an additional one now is we're going to have the September edition of Brown Bagging It in My Backyard. And this is by popular request. This is going to be a facts and Q&A with Robin and Jane, who are the creators of Nature in My Backyard, talking about the questions that people have in approaching how to use Nature in My Backyard, how to request site visits, some experiences of those site visits, and any other questions people have. These are two of the people that have got extraordinarily deep wells of knowledge. And it should be, as it always is with the two of them, a very lively conversation. So you want to make sure that you tune in. And that will be again at noon on Wednesday, September 11th. We're going to get into it here. This is really exciting. I had a wonderful conversation with Peggy this morning just to try and get some background. And she's a very, very interesting person. But I asked her this question, Peggy Spaeth, here you are, you've been involved in all these efforts at combating invasive species and restoring natives. You must have this deep academic background in the biological sciences. And she said, Harvey, no. When I was required to take biology way back in the dark ages of my educational journey, it required me to prick my finger to get a droplet of blood, which was necessary for a classroom experiment. And she said, I, being a fainter, immediately ran out of the classroom and never looked back. So the straight A student didn't do too well in biology, majored in arts, and went on to have an amazing career as a collaborator, well, as a wife, as a mother, but as a booster of Cleveland Heights, and being the founder executive director of Heights Arts and leading that for 13 years. Just a really remarkable way of engaging people in her community in the areas that interested her and the places that she thought needed attention, whether it was arts in the schools or just giving a platform for talking about arts within the community. But when she and John Barber, her partner, got together and acquired a house in Cleveland Heights, one of the things that one of her ambitions in life had been to live in the metro parks. And that not being quite possible, her desire then was, how could I bring the metro parks to my yard? And when they were looking at their suburban yard and they were looking at how little was native and how little looked like a metro parks, they set about and resolved to change that. And this is going to be her story. I just want to point out that in addition to what John and Peggy have done on their property, they've created so many organizations. The group that does the stewardship and sustainability efforts around Lower Lake and removing invasive species, they were behind that, and they now have a group. Peggy said on some Sundays you might see 25 people out there that are pulling up invasive species and planting natives. The Heights Native Pollinator Pathway Facebook group, I'm going to repeat that again, Heights Native Pollinator Pathway Facebook group now has 1,200 members. Well, 1,201, because I joined this morning. It's an amazing treasure trove of resources for creating backyard habitat. But one of the things that's intriguing is that to enter, you are asked a question, and that is, why do you want to join? And Peggy shared with me a list of the answers to those questions from people, not just from this region, but from all over. And it's just amazing, this community of people, this tribe, if you will, of everybody that is seeking to learn more and to do more where they can for native wildlife, native flora, native fauna. So I guess with that introduction, I'll turn it over to Peggy. Her program is entitled Bringing Nature Home. Take it away, Peggy Spaeth.
Well, thank you, Harvey, and thank you for your conversation earlier today too. Kindred spirits, obviously. Welcome, friends, family, strangers, nature lovers, to this talk, Bringing Nature Home. You're probably familiar with the book, Bringing Nature Home by Doug Tallamy, the guru of today's movement of bringing, starting to garden in our own yards and in our own communities and public and private spaces with native plants instead of thinking that nature is somewhere else. It's right here. And as Doug says, garden as if life depends on it, because indeed it does. And we are in a climate emergency. And if we can just do whatever is in our power, besides not eating meat and all those other things, to try to turn this around collectively, then you can start in your own backyard. So welcome. I'm going to, I think the most common question that I hear from people is, how do you get started with this? How do you change the way you view your yard and your landscape? And where do you begin? So I'm going to kind of give you a personal story. We've all got our own stories, but this is our story. Okay, wait a second. Technical support. I can't advance the slide. John? Excuse me. My technical support is not responding to me.
It's nice. It's nice that these programs involve real people that have challenges, technological challenges, just as I have.
Not an arrow. Ah, right here. Okay, sorry about that. It's been one of those mornings. So the map at the top is a bird's eye view of our street, Bradford Road in Cleveland Heights, and it has about 100 houses. You can see that the landscape, which used to be, Ohio was 95% forested, you can see that the landscape has been turned into a whole series of little rectangles. And when I look at this, I feel like nature is in jail somehow. I mean, each one of us has our own property, and we have our own love of how we want our property to look. And so habitat is very fragmented. So when you go from yard to yard on either side of the street, you'll see a completely different kind of yard. Some people love one kind of plant, others want a lawn, others have ornamentals that they got from the local nursery. And so it kind of gives you a feeling of like what we may be able to do in changing the way we think about our neighborhoods even. So the picture on the right is a bird's eye view of our lot, which is 50 feet by 222 feet. So we're very lucky to have this very deep yard, and it goes down at the very back into kind of a wetland there, where there was probably an intermittent stream that's been filled in for the development. So how can we even begin, in our own yards and in our neighborhood to provide a healthy habitat for all of nature, starting with plants and then benefiting the insects, birds, small mammals, other wildlife, including ourselves, that sustains life on Earth. So I'm going to show you what gardening with natives looks like in our residential setting. And this is our story inspired by nature. So I'm going to start with my dog, Jack, who's no longer with us, unfortunately. Jack and I used to go with my family to Jackson Field in the Cleveland Metro Parks. And it's so interesting to go back to the same place over and over, because then you begin to understand the story of nature. and what is going on throughout the season. So this story is in part inspired by Jackson Field, which was, for me, a model of where I wanted to live. I wanted to live in this kind of a habitat. And in the spring, what we would see is this glorious field in a sparse woods of Virginia bluebells. And I just wanted to remind you, Jane, can you please put a link to the handout in the chat? Because I have a whole list in the handout of all of these plants that I'm going to be showing you. And then I've also uploaded a PDF version of this talk so that you can compare, find the names and find the plants in case it's something that you want to bring into your own yard. So imagine just walking in your, just a few miles outside of Cleveland and seeing this glorious sight, which I had never even heard of Virginia bluebells before, because in the spring, usually we think of daffodils and tulips and other plants, which are not really from Ohio. And then another plant that we would see interspersed with the Virginia bluebells is the great white trillium, which I never knew, and maybe you didn't either, is Ohio State's wildflower. And it's a very prolific and beautiful bulb-like plant that blooms in the spring, obviously, with the companion of the Virginia bluebells. We're all familiar with hyacinths that we buy in bulbs and in huge packages at our local nurseries. But have you ever seen a wild hyacinth, which is a rather briefly flowering and yet beautiful vista in these same woods? So all of these different plants were in the same woods. I was simply gobsmacked. Look at the little pollinators just climbing in there and doing their thing. It's just an absolutely gorgeous plant that I now have in my yard. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about Latin names, because a lot of people are very, very intimidated by the fact that it's Latin, but if you just think of them as names, like you have a lot of friends and sometimes they have a long name and sometimes they have a short name and they use a nickname. And so we're in the habit of using common names for our plants. So let me just show you. On the left is false indigo and on the right is false indigo. You couldn't have two plants that are more different, so that when somebody's saying, I have false indigo in my yard, you're going like, well, which kind of false indigo do you have? But if you know their Latin name, if you know it's Amorpha fructosa, the shrub, or Baptisia australis, then you know exactly what plant. And this transcends, it transcends English. So like if you talk about Amorpha fructosa in another country, they know what plant you're talking about. I mean, they might not have it there, but they can find out. So it's a universal language in the language of plants. And so the first name is the genus and the second name is the species. So you can have Baptisia alba, which is a white Baptisia instead of Baptisia australis. So once you get into, for example, the goldenrods, they all have the same first name and then they have different second names, just like we do. Like my brother and sister and I all have the same last name, but different first names. So I'm not going to get into that anymore. Sorry. But also, if you want to feel a little bit confident about learning how to pronounce these Latin names, go to the Missouri Botanical Garden Plant Finder website, and you can see I circled, they have the name of the plant, which you can search for, and then you can hit that little button, and this very lovely man with a lovely voice will pronounce it for you and repeat it as often as you want until you feel like you can talk about it. So what I would advise you when you are starting out on this journey of learning how to plant native plants is to learn from nature. Observe. I mean, we tend to rely on our plant apps and, which we have a gazillion of. And, but if you start to look at nature and then use your plant app, or heaven forbid, a book, then you can start to learn who and what these plants are. And one of the other key things is learning to plant the right plant in the right place. There is, I mean, if you look at a crack in the asphalt, something's coming up there. I mean, there is a plant for every place, whether it's, desert or wetlands or whatever. So sometimes when you get a plant, you put it somewhere it doesn't thrive. If you can find out where it wants to be, or it'll just move itself, then do that. I also wanted to counsel you that a native garden doesn't just mean letting your grass grow, and it's not necessarily a messy garden. So if you are worried about planting a native garden in a urban setting like we live in, it's possible to do this without having it look messy. But just also remember that change is constant because this is nature. And every day, and with every light and every rainfall and every season, your garden is going to change. So you're not going to be like planting begonias in the spring and having them look the same way every day until you pull them out in October. So your plants are going to change. And if you have a nice mix of plants, you'll have a variety of things blooming or going to seed at different times. Also be curious. I mean, don't be afraid to dig a plant up and look at the roots. Like, how is this plant growing? Some of them have roots that spread and some of them have roots that go down, and it's kind of fascinating. And then look at the seeds, even buy an inexpensive microscope or get what are those things called that you look through? A hand lens. And because the seeds are so fascinating as well, they're all different. And then you can also move your plants around to find their sweet spot, or as I mentioned before, let them find it. They'll go to seed where the seeds are going to be happy. And so you're going to be a curator. Gardening is being a curator, and curate gently, because you're learning to have a relationship with these plants that you might not know too much about. The other thing that I learned from going back to Jackson Field frequently is to install plant communities. You saw that wonderful matrix of different plants that we saw, living together. And you want to let the companion plants start to find their space and work out their relationships. When we first plant, we often mulch so that we can keep the other weeds down until the plants fill in. But after that, mulch is not a plant, it's just a dead space. So use plants as mulch and try to fill in your plant communities densely so that there isn't any bare space for unwanted things to come up in. So we're going to walk through parklands in our garden, and we're going to go from woodlands to meadows to inspire you to go a little wilder. And I'm going to be showing you about 30 native plants, and hopefully you'll get the handout and be able, or you can get it later and go back and investigate them more fully. And the last piece of advice, it's not going to be your last piece of advice, but is to just start small. If you don't have a garden yet, just this fall when you plant, and fall is the best time to plant, I think. Just choose 3 plants and get them started. And then you'll inevitably want to keep going and add more. So I wanted to show you, this is our backyard when we first moved in 2016. And it's all grass and hostas and English ivy. And I think there were, I don't know, a tulip or 2. And so I just wanted to use this quote from Isabella Tree's wonderful book called Wilding, when she said, "We had always been passionate about wildlife in an amateurish way and had traveled the world to see it." Think about your vacations. You go to a national park. But we'd never questioned why we had so little in our own backyard. So that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to appreciate our own ecosystem and what we can plant in our yards. So here we go. This is our backyard, and look at all that English ivy. And people are always like, oh, I can't deal with this. I don't know how to get rid of it. But if you start to pull one piece of English ivy, you might find that it's about 10 feet long. And if you keep following it, you can get to a point where you can start digging it up. So we just kind of hand dug. Are you getting an echo? I hope you're not getting this echo that I'm getting. We hand dug our English ivy, which is a non-native plant, but obviously a lot of us, I have to admit that I too thought it was a good alternative to lawn at one point at one of the houses that I lived in. And I planted English ivy around a tree. And of course, then I moved and the new owners had to deal with it. But we've all made this mistake of thinking that it's better than grass, but it's not. It's actually a very inert substance. Have you ever seen anything eating English ivy? So nothing is benefiting in nature from it. So here you can see John's hard at work. He's digging up non-native honeysuckle, and we just had a lot of shrubs. We had a lot of ivy, and we just were fortunately retired, and this was a few years ago, and we just sort of kept at it. And I was just gobsmacked about what came up after we pulled out the non-natives. I mean, what would have been there before we moved there, or before the Europeans came and started to settle our area. This is a wonderful native. I know some people hate it. I love it. It's five-leafed ivy or Virginia creeper or Parthenocissus cankifolia. It's a beautiful ground cover that is in our woodlands. And when it climbs up a tree or a wall or a fence, it goes to berries, and it has these absolutely gorgeous little blue berries on red stems. I love it as a ground cover. If you're afraid of it expanding, you just snip it. Again, we're curating, we're gardening. And it turns an absolutely gorgeous red color in the fall. So I always like to say that native plants are beautiful, beneficial, and resilient. But I always put beautiful first because, that's what captures me, is the beauty of plants. Another plant that comes up in our woodlands straight up through the leaf litter, it just has this little pointy top, is the trout lily or dogtooth violet. So this is, again, this is not daffodils and tulips in the spring. This is, March and April, what comes up, and it's got a beautiful flower. It also has a white variety, but I don't have any in my yard. It's got this beautiful yellow flower with the bright red stamens, and then it goes to seed and you get more, and it's got these liver leaf leaves. It's just an absolutely beautiful spring plant. So here's kind of a picture of what we did, which was removing the invasives. We edged, because we wanted to look like an intentional garden. We edged our islands of new plants with rock that was actually already in our yard that we just were digging up when we were digging up other things. And then we did not do any really major planning. The only planning we did was, like, when we look out the back door, are we going to see a redbud? Yes, we're going to plant a redbud right there. So, I mean, I often also encourage people to think, what are you going to see from your window? Because you're going to see it all year round. What's going to, make you happy when you have your coffee and look out the window in the morning? So we didn't make a plan for our backyard. We just started with these islands of plants that we were trying out. And then eventually we started to, why don't we connect that island? And then we went and got free wood chips over at Lower Lake and hauled them in, and we made paths. And it's really started, as you can see in these pictures, which are a bit old now, it starts to look like no lawn and a native garden. Oh, the other thing we did was we left the leaves where they fell. I love that advice from Doug Tallamy. Leave the leaves under the tree that grew them. And that really makes a lot of sense to me. So this, you can see the comparison of what before and after, and how we brought so many of the plants that we'd seen in the metro parks, like on the right side, the little white flower is foam flower, or Tiarella cordifolia, which spreads by rhizomes. And then there's some ferns and wild geraniums, which is one of my favorite colors in the world, this lovely lavender. So that's another a spring picture. And also in the spring, we have Jack in the Pulpit, which is very prevalent all throughout our metro parks. So we've got all this is a great threesome, and these are threesome. This is companion plantings, which is what I spoke of before, plants that grow together in nature. I also wanted to point out what fun you can have with Jack in the Pulpit, because it goes to seed with these really bright red seeds. And if you ignore them, they'll just fall off the stalk, and they'll, either be eaten or they'll start to grow. But you can also just press them into some soil, cover them up, and grow your own new crop of Jack in the Pulpits, which is great fun, because we all love to see something sprout in the spring. And here again is Trillium that we spoke of earlier. And on the right is Trillium in Jackson Field in the wild. And then on the left is Trillium in our garden. I used to think, that there was white Trillium and pink Trillium, but a naturalist pointed out that the white Trillium turn pink after they've been pollinated, which, who knew? And then they'll go to seed. And again, you can simply let the seeds drop down into the leaf litter. This is another plant that just comes right up through leaf litter. These are plants that are called spring ephemerals because they come up in the spring and then they eventually die back and are invisible again. But they have the capacity to just poke themselves right up through the leaf litter. So you don't have to worry about moving your leaves. There's several different kinds of Solomon seals, but this is the smooth Solomon seal. And on the left is a huge patch of it, which I can only think is decades old, at Lower Lake. And look at that beautiful color that it turns in the fall. And then on the right again is us bringing some home, not from there. We purchased the plants. We never dig up in the wild, and in our own yard. Another Solomon seal has these really interesting little berries that are multicolored, false Solomon seal. And a third, starry false Solomon seal, which is a huge, can turn into a very big monoculture, which some people want. I mean, how we love hostas because and they're not native, I'll just mention that, because they fill in a space in the shade. Well, this is another plant that if you get it started with just a few plants, it's very rhizomous and it sends roots up, and it just keeps filling in. And so I have a big mass of it in the backyard, which sometimes we dig them up and give them away, but it really fills in a space. And if you're looking for like a shady ground cover, they grow about 1 foot high. But also here at Holden on the right, it's growing with golden ragwort, which is another wonderful spring flowering native. I'll show you that right next, I believe. Yes, this is golden ragwort. It starts out on the bottom. You can see these kind of little purpley sprouts, buds. And so when I first got it, I thought it was going to have purple flowers, but it sends up these tall yellow flowers, golden ragwort. And then after they die back early in the spring, I think maybe early June, then it turns into this really beautiful ground cover with glossy green leaves. So again, if you're looking for something to be a shady ground cover, this is another really good plant for that. Plus, it's very beneficial. Zizia aurea golden Alexander is in the carrot family, and it's the host of the black swallowtail. And it's another spring plant. Right now, it's going to seed, and it's got a lot of black seeds that if you can just collect and you can scatter them, or you can start seeds over the winter and give plants away. it's very prolific and a very pretty plant. I was gobsmacked when I first saw this lily at Jackson Field along the Chagrin River, just dangling above the water. And I had no idea that Ohio had such a beautiful tropical looking plant. And I was very lucky when Holden was having some plant sales several years ago, they had propagated them. And so we have a lovely stand of them in our yard that blooms in July. And it's a beautiful plant. I'm sure you're all going to go like, where can I get that? And we'll hope to find places to recommend for that at the end of the story. Sedges are also a great filler in your garden. They grow in nature amidst other plants. This is one of our favorites. It's called Gray's sedge, and it has this very interesting seed head. Each one of those little spikes is a seed. And after they get brown like that, you can take those seed heads apart and either scatter them or put them in pots and grow more. But it also expands on its own, and you can have some lovely, lovely clumps of gray sedge. And here is another sedge that's called seersucker sedge. And down on the bottom left, you can see those fuzzy flowers, and they're wind pollinated. They bloom in March. So it's really the very first thing that has any bloom. And it's got the leaves are very puckered, which is why people call it seersucker sedge. And at the top left is a hillside of it at Swire's Castle, which showed me that it was a really good thing to hold erosion. And so we planted it in our yard on a little bit of a slope as well. You can see it in the winter in the snow. It sort of stays green all winter long, and then it turns really green in the spring and stays that way all summer long. So I'm not sure why I'm showing you this picture, but just to show you how beautiful our yard looks in the fall with these beautiful paths winding down to the back of the yard. So I'm going to now move into the front yard, but before we go from our shady backyard, the woodlands, as I call them, into the sun, I just want to go back over a few comments that I made. And the first one is, this is how gardening with natives is different than what we all grew up with, traditional gardening. We're not planting tulips and daffodils. Our spring bulbs are the wild hyacinth, the trillium, jack-in-the-pulpit, trout lily, and all of the other things that bloom in the spring. So instead of pest-free, I'm using pest in kind of quotes because we have to stop thinking of insects as being pests. But instead of English ivy, which nothing eats, and vinca, our ground covers feed native insects, birds, and mammals. Pests are actually beneficial. I remember the first time I had some of this wild ginger up in the left-hand corner, and there were holes in the leaves. Oh my God! I said, "Oh no, something's eating my plant." And then I went like, "Oh, something's eating my plant." So that's the whole concept of plants are beneficial. They're not just ornamental. They're beneficial to wildlife. And our native insects will not destroy their host. They're not going to be like the emerald ash borer, which is from another continent that comes in and destroys our ashes. Our native insects they want to be able to come back and eat this plant again next year. So they're just taking some bites out of it and then letting it go on. So I also wanted to mention that the plants in the nurseries that we're accustomed to buying, which particularly the non-natives, they are programmed to peak at selling time. So we walk in and, oh my goodness, look at that. I want that. It's red or it's beautiful, or they're all so pretty and tempting. And you end up putting everything in your shopping cart with these non-native things. But our natives are in sync with the local seasonal cycles, which is why they are more resilient. And that we don't dig them up at the end of the year and throw them out into our piles of leaves. So, and again, our traditional planting time has always been Memorial Day weekend. Everybody goes to the nurseries on Memorial Day weekend and they load up their carts and they go home and they plant. But our natives, we plant them in early spring and in the fall. And it does, because that's the timing of being in sync with nature. So I'm just going to briefly, what time is it? Oh, not too bad. I want to take you into our sunny front yard. And when we moved in, as you can see on the left, it was all lawn. And I actually did make a plan for this, which, you know, I changed many times, but I did make a plan. We were very lucky to have this kind of curvy front yard, front walk, which I love, because then you can, you know, instead of, we have a traditional way of planting foundation plantings, which are just straight across the front of the house, because we want to show off our houses. Our houses are lovely, but and in our house, all that was on there besides the lawn was a row of hostas with, I think you might see one little yellow tulip sticking up. And so I enjoyed having this kind of swooping front walk, because then I could start to, you know, soften the yard with some beds and paths that were more curvilinear, which is more natural, shall we say, and less regimented, and, you know, not like Versailles where everything is, you know, very rigid. Not that our house is anything like Versailles, but so we already had a blue spruce in the yard, which is not native, but we weren't going to take it down. And we're so glad we didn't, because it's a condominium in the spring. First, the grackles are nesting at the top, and then the doves and the robins, and sometimes the hummingbirds. We have, and it's just such fun to watch all the birds that love to nest in this greenery. But we decided to first start with planting a tree in the middle. And after a little bit of research, we decided to go with a tulip tree. And this is kind of, looking out of our upstairs window, how the yard evolved. We would, you know, first we put in the tree, and then we started to dig up different areas of sod and make the gardens bigger and bigger. But, you know, this is over time. It's not like we did not dig up the whole front yard all at once. It's just too overwhelming to even think about. But over time, we dug up sod and planted, and then moved things around when they, you know, like, this plant's not happy here. My partner always says he tells the plants, he says, you know, don't make friends, don't unpack your suitcase, because, you know, you might get moved. So we wait, you know, we let them unpack their suitcases once we find out where they're going to be happy. But look at the progression that happened in the yard as the shrubs and the trees filled in over time. And look at what happened to that little tulip tree in 2017 that was John 6 feet high. So it was maybe almost 8 feet high. And now it's taller than the house. And it's just a beautiful tree. Look at it in the fall. It hasn't matured enough to have any flowers yet. I will learn at what maturity it will have flowers, but it's just been a really beautiful tree that's created a new habitat in our front yard, a shady one. So I want to talk just a little bit about the Heights Native Pollinator Path. So we got our yard, we eventually gave our electric mower to the postman because we didn't need it anymore. We didn't have any grass left. And one February, I guess that's 2019, I was feeling very bored, because aren't we all bored? There's nothing growing in February unless we're starting plants in our basement. And I was just very eager for spring. And I sent out an email to my neighbors at the Bradford Roadies, we call ourselves, and said, you know, was anybody interested in starting a garden on their tree lawn? This wasn't my idea. This is being done in a lot of communities to try to connect habitat. And so, and the Nature Center was going to have their spring sale. So I talked to them about preparing some pollinator packs that just cost $20 with like 3 species in it, 3 little plugs. And I sold them to my neighbors. And I'm not taking a cut here. I just, you know, took their money and gave it to the Nature Center. And people bought them and started to make these small gardens on their yard. So we started out as the Bradford Pollinator Path. And the purpose of it is to improve habitat for wildlife in our own yard. And then to connect habitat so that we can have our insects and birds do the trap lining that they like to do, to go from plant to plant, to not have just an island, but a path for them to progress through. And then the other goal is to market this idea by having a sign in our front yard so that when the hundreds of dog walkers that come by our yard see what the yards look like, they're curious about, oh, what are these? What is this beautiful plant that's growing here? And that they'll be curious enough to maybe look us up on the internet and to do this in their own yard. So after the first season, some of our neighbors who were walking around the block from the streets on either side of us were saying, well, what are you guys doing on Bradford with this Bradford pollinator path? And we said, well, we explained what we were doing. And they said, well, we want to do it too. So we had to expand our concept to become the Heights Native Pollinator Path. And then we just realized that, we are hyper local, which is wonderful because we're all meeting each other and we're sharing our knowledge on this Facebook group that we have. But people are connected with us in Minnesota and in Columbus, Ohio, and Connecticut and Australia. Which is great because there's a kind of global community of an appreciation of nature and of trying to rewild our habitat in our own yards. So I just want to say about Facebook, I only joined Facebook to keep in touch with my two children who are not on Facebook. But now we have our Facebook group of the Heights Native Pollinator Path that's grown to over 1,200 people. As Harvey said, maybe 1,201 now. And we would invite you to join. There's just a simple membership question so that we can keep out people who might want to hack us. And we just ask you, why do you want to join the Heights Native Pollinator Path? And then we'll let you in. And I've been very excited when people say to me that they've learned so much from simply being on this Facebook group. It's the only Facebook thing that I personally follow. Well, there are a few others, but there's a lot of other great groups featuring native plants and birds and nature that you can also learn from, and you can find them. But it's really been a very inspirational and knowledge-based thing. So I would just encourage you to start small when you are doing your own little, if you want to do a garden in your front yard and be part of a pollinator path or just enjoy the pleasure of it for yourself. You don't have to be part of anything. Being part of it is really fun though, because you get to meet a lot of people who have the same goals as you. So like when our street started, we encouraged them, just, start with a little patch, dig up. And we always encourage people to dig the sod up. It's just the easiest and quickest way to really get rid of weeds and this, that, and the other thing. And then, so our Heights Native Pollinator Path guidelines are to please put it in your front yard, which isn't to say that you can't garden in your backyard. Please do every place that you can imagine to do. Do a little guerrilla gardening, but don't tell anybody. I told you to do that. Dig up the sod, and then to be on the path, we ask that you have at least 85% native plants and no non-native invasive species, which is a whole nother topic that other people can talk about more, but we don't want you to have English ivy. We don't want you to have privet. We don't want you to have burning bush. Just start looking for invasive species in Ohio and you'll see what not to plant. But it's been such fun to watch each one of these little gardens get bigger, but this is what it looks like in the beginning. And then this is what it looks like sometimes even the first year. And these are great companion plants. These are in the sun. Upper left is June. We've got our native iris, which is blue, Iris versicolor, and penstemon, which is a wonderful, sometimes it's pink, sometimes it's white. And if you have a whole bunch of penstemon, it even makes it a showier show. And then beneath it is what is just starting to stop blooming, which is Culver's root. on the left, the white, it's white and spiky, and it has really great architecture in your yard. And the leaves all turn a beautiful yellow in the fall. And you could not go wrong with cardinal flower, especially if you're of course, everybody wants hummingbirds. Hummingbirds love red, and they love the Lobelia cardinalis. And Rudbeckia, you can't go wrong with either, because it will bloom and bloom and bloom and bloom. And then on the right, we have the other lobelia, the blue one, which is very prolific in particularly moist areas, and another milkweed, Asclepias tuberosa, which is called the butterfly milkweed, which the purple and the blue together, I mean, the purpley blue and the orange together, I always think of as Van Gogh colors, and it's just spectacular on your tree lawn or anywhere in your yard. Another plant I had never met before was the pale coneflower, which really attracts the bees and just looks, I always say that it looks like a ballerina after a very, a dance that just everything's wilted in her tutu. It's just a really sweet prairie plant. And our neighbor across the street has a beautiful fall display. In the front is New York aster. It's a shorter one. The taller purple one is New England aster, and then tall boneset in the back. And her tree lawn is just a buzz with pollinators in the fall. And it's so interesting too, because, we used to buy mums in the fall and plant them and then dig them up and throw them away. But you don't have to buy mums. You can have this amazing, gorgeous colors of goldenrods and asters and bonesets in the fall, and they will persist far into October, and then go to seed and benefit our birds. Zigzag goldenrod is a beautiful ground cover until it blooms. I guess it'll be blooming probably in September, and it's got these lovely spiky yellow flowers. One of my personal favorites is blue stem goldenrod at the top left. That's in our yard, but underneath it, that picture is a whole mass of it in the shade at Lower Lake. And so you can see how it's a shade-loving goldenrod that just has this wonderful arching stem. And on the right is heart-leafed aster, which is going to be all over our yard soon, but I don't care. It just like really reseeds. If you look closely at the leaves, you can see they actually have a little dip in the middle. So that's why it's called heart-leafed aster. And these very pale purpley blue flowers. So gosh, we're going to have room for your questions, I think. But I just wanted to mention that we're hosting a native plant sale. This is, I think, our 5th year, featuring 4 regional nurseries on Saturday, September 21st at Forest Hill Presbyterian Church, which is across the street from Forest Hill Park in Cleveland Heights. And when we first started with this journey, it was really hard to find native plants. Very tempting to want to go off into the woods, and the closest we could get to was the occasional sale at the Metro Parks or at Holden, or driving down to Columbus to go to Scioto Nurseries, which is one of the oldest native plant nurseries around. But since then, we've got Avonlea and Gardens and Meadow City and Native Roots and Planted Native, and they're all coming. I mean, it's so nice to have 4 different native plant vendors all in one place, because then you don't have to drive around. And they all have, basically they all have native plants. Some of them bring more shrubs than others. You can also call or go online and order from them, and they'll actually bring plants to the sale so that you don't have to drive to their places. And please come. It's been a really fun native plant sale, and we'll have a booth for Friends of Heights Parks and Heights Native Pollinator Path, and I'd love to meet all of you who want to go native, and we'll have a raffle of some native plants as well. And it's a very lovely event. Again, we're not doing this for any compensation. We just are volunteering our time to bring them together and trying to support their industry so that they will keep providing us with native plants. I'm just ending my inexhaustible talk with a picture of what will be soon at the field at Jackson Field. And, this isn't something I can put in my yard because I don't have that kind of acreage, but we do have some of the ironweed, and there's, those wild goldenrods that reseed over and over. But what a heartwarming scene to just see all these colors together and the blue sky and the clouds. It's just a very beautiful place. So I'm open to questions if there are any, or if you're all done with your lunch hour and need to go somewhere else, that's good.
I think we have time for conversation. I would just like to point out to everybody that Jane did post the native plant list. It's on the chat. So if you go into the chat, you can click on there and download it. And that all of the material that Peggy was talking about will also be on the Nature in My Backyard webpage. So we'll have links to all that as well. I just have a question for you to start things off. You have a wonderful optimism, and as you're showing how you're sharing your journey, your and John's journey, what you've done with your yard. And I think about what you guys have done in terms of inspiring others by virtue of your example, and you have catalyzed that. Can you just speak to, are you hopeful? I mean, you said that you're hoping to see this catch on the pollinator pathway and more of these tree lawn parcels. Does that bring you hope? Do you see roadblocks to this?
Is this a trick question?
Because no, it's not. No, it's not. I'm really curious about your view looking forward about where all this could end.
I don't even know how to answer that question, Harvey, because I feel like like yesterday, I came home from a trip and I was at the airport, and why are people driving all these big cars? Don't they realize that we have to stop driving these huge gas guzzlers? So I feel so many people don't have the sense of urgency that we have, that we're destroying our own habitat here on Earth. So that really frustrates me. That really drives me crazy, like this kind of ignoring it. On the other hand, when I work with a group of people on a Sunday morning at Lower Lake, and we all get back together at the end of the morning, I just look around and everybody you can just see this sense of peace and contentment that we have done something positive simply by doing the work that we're doing together, and that we can look around at each other and know that we have a small army of people. So the jury is out, and I think I know this is kind of a sick viewpoint, but I feel that if we do destroy the planet, and destroy our habitat and destroy humans, the apex predator on the Earth will probably heal itself, but we'll be gone. So is that optimistic, or?
Well, I don't, but I think that there's great optimism in what you just showed. You mentioned you get over to Lower Lake and you're with a group of people, and we talked about this morning before the Zoom thing about how when you get communities involved in this, it becomes almost tribal. You get people who have seen the light, or they now are inspired, and they recognize that they actually have power to do something. And to combat that frustration of the big SUVs queued up at the airport is the fact that we are all called to do what we can with what we have where we are, and the fact that we can make a difference. As a matter of fact, it's probably the essential thing that we can do is start in our backyard and work out from there. So I do find optimism, but I share, it is, the clock is ticking, and we have so many challenges that face us, and in my programs, I often talk about how, I was very involved in trying to restore bald eagles to health. And I know that John was very involved in restoring peregrine falcons. And, here are two species that have now come back famously. And now there are bald eagles everywhere, and there's peregrine falcon iris throughout the greater Cleveland area. But when you look at the amount of effort that went into the restoration of just two species, and then you recognize that there might be 5 to 10 million species on planet Earth, how can we possibly, do the same thing for all of the rest of them? And they're gonna slip through our fingers unless we do something. And the best thing we can do is start in our own backyard. So,
Yes, well said.
okay.
I think we have a question from Carolyn Hufford, who had her hand up. Carolyn, you can unmute yourself if you like.
I think I answered Carolyn's question. She couldn't get the plant list in the chat.
Oh, sorry. Thank you.
Okay, so I addressed that. And Jennifer Yates has a question.
Yeah, I have a favor to ask you guys. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. I have a friend in New Jersey that is super, super excited and motivated about native plants. And she is a teacher in New Jersey. And hold on one second. And she started an after school program for native plants, and it was very, very successful. And she's looking at going national. And I told her about Peggy, and she's putting together a presentation. And I was wondering if I could send Peggy the Zoom maybe next week, and she can critique it for us, or if you guys could critique it for us before we go to bigger things. She's just looking
fun. That's great. The people are so enthusiastic. Also send it to me, Jennifer. I have some contacts with people who are similarly thinking of after school programs. And one of the things that's difficult in this is we don't want to duplicate each other's efforts, and so maybe that they can somehow collaborate.
Yeah, that's what we're looking at doing. Hers is basically, it's a little bit different. They've been working really, anyways. Yeah, I'll send all that information to you. We're super excited, and I think it would take off. So it's people like you guys that are reaching out to others, and I think the word is spreading, and you guys are making a big difference. So cahoots to you guys.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Jennifer. And one comment that I wanted to make about Harvey's question is that, oh my gosh, just do we have hope or not? At the rate that this is expanding, with everyone seemingly piling on, I mean, if it continues to grow exponentially as it has, then there's every chance that maybe there is some hope. And for sure, we don't want to get to our final day and say, well, I was hopeless, so I did nothing. That is certainly not the approach. So, and I also want to be sure that everyone who wants to know knows that if you want help getting started, just because you're not seeing it yourself, one of the opportunities with Nature in My Backyard is that we will send volunteers into your backyard to help you identify invasives and think about what natives you can replace them with and what else you might be doing to get on the bandwagon.
Well
I
said,
want to
Jane.
just maybe make a quick comment about schools and public lands as well. I mean, as Harvey mentioned, we're working at Lower Lake, which is a public park, and the reason we're doing that is because the cities who maintain the parks don't have staff or expertise to manage natural areas, so they mow, and that's they mow and blow. And also we have, they don't know to take out invasive species. So when you think of all of the lawn that there is in our parks, but then when you think of all the lawn that there is around schools, I mean, our schools have lots and lots of lawn and playgrounds, and they're just all mowed. And so then they take the kids and they put them in school buses that run on gasoline, and they take them to a nature center or, a park for lessons on nature where, they could just have nature in their own backyard. So I am a big advocate of trying to renaturalize schoolyards as well. And it doesn't have to be wild. Again, a lot of them have a lot of trees. So let plants grow under the trees, let the leaves fall, see what happens, make some paths through there. One of my grandchildren I think she was 6 last Christmas, at Christmas time, on Christmas morning, if you remember, Christmas was really warm this year. It was like, I don't know, 60 degrees, 65. She comes up to me, she says, Grandma, can I go explore in your backyard? And it was like, this kid didn't need grass, and she just went out in the backyard and she just picked up all kinds of things and made this little collection. And, kids love to do that. So why are we trekking them away from their schoolyards instead of creating nature in their backyards? Okay, off my soapbox.
Oh, well said though, Peggy. Well said. It's a great, great point. Well, guys, we're at a couple minutes past 1 o'clock, and we kind of promised that this would be an hour long. I want to thank Peggy Spaeth for a fabulous program, and I find tremendous optimism in it, and I'm so excited to see what you and John have done with your yard, and then how you've taken your native plant and native habit evangelism to parks and elsewhere in the community, because you inspire all of us. So thank you so much. And to everyone else, thanks for participating. And just again, on September 11th, we will be having our next brown bagging it in my backyard. This will be Q&A with Jane and with Robin. So join us then. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Harvey.
Thank you.
Peggy. Thanks, Peggy. That was great.
Oh, I really enjoyed it. I love
Yeah.
to talk about plants. So thanks for listening.
Oh, no,
Well,
I mean, it's
you do
wonderful.
such a great job, Peggy.
Thank
it's
you.
wonderful. And I hope I didn't put you on the spot with that.
I don't know.
You did.
I'm just going to go jump off a bridge now. No.
It was terrific. It was really great. Thank you.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thank you. Thank you for asking me. I, really enjoyed the opportunity. Sorry, the technology was a little slow, but fortunately tech support arrived just in time. Thank you, John. Thank you, John Barber. So we're all good.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks.
See you all.
Take care.
Thank you.